how did we go from this to this to this and this and this? Today I'm talking about the history of the aircraft carrier. So, I've been interested in aircraft carriers since basically watching Top Gun when I was a kid. There's a new one, a sequel out this year. I've seen it, it's quite good. But that kind of, this new Top Gun film kind of prompted me to make this video, because I wanted to talk about the history and the evolution of the aircraft carrier, which it starts basically back in the First World War. Now, naval aviation at that time, it was mainly carried out by seaplane tenders. So you'd have a ship coming along with your seaplanes, crane your seaplane off into the water, it would take off, do what it needed to do, come back, land on the water, and be craned back on the ship. This was not especially practical, and especially in rough seas, in the middle of the sea, a seaplane, rough seas, couldn't always take off. So the idea of having a conventional wheeled aircraft take off from the deck of a ship was proposed. In 1912, Lieutenant C.R. Sampson became the first pilot to take off from a ship, taken to the air in a short S-38 biplane from a temporary platform erected on the forecastle of HMS Africa. But it wasn't until 1917 that Commander E.H. Dunning became the first pilot to land on a ship, again recovering a Sopwith pup on a wooden temporary deck rigged up on HMS Furious. Sadly, he died making a second attempt the following day, but these trials proved that you could take off and land from the deck of a ship. But again, these little temporary runways set up on battleships weren't ideal. Now, in 1912, William Beardmore, the famous Dumbarton shipbuilder, had suggested a design for an aircraft carrier with a full-length flight deck. The proposal had been ignored by the Admiralty, but obviously now we're in the First World War, this idea is getting dusted off. So in 1916, now with a pressing need for an aircraft carrier, the Admiralty bought the partly completed ocean liner Conte Rosso, at that point under construction at Beardmore, and had it converted into the world's first aircraft carrier. This became HMS Argus, and it was commissioned in September 1918, 2 months before the end of the war. So it never saw service in the First World War, but it did prove the concept, and she spent the first few years of her life basically doing trials with different kinds of arresting gear and proving the concept. Argus and many of the earliest aircraft carriers were just converted from other ships, either from ocean liners in the case of Argus, or battleships or cruisers. The first ship to be designed from the keel up as an aircraft carrier was HMS Hermes, laid down in January 1918 at Armstrong Whitworth. And she kind of set the trend for the next 20 years for aircraft carrier design. She had she's got this island structure on the starboard side. Apparently this was because on a failed landing, aircraft would turn to port, so it made sense to have the island on the starboard side. So that contains your bridge and the funnel. That takes us up to the start of the Second World War. So the aircraft carrier is developed and refined. So by the time we get to the Second World War, it's kind of a mature technology, and we see most of the major combatants during the Second World War have aircraft carriers, and they are absolutely devastating. The Battle of Taranto in 1940, that Britain came in, knocked out the Italian fleet. Japan copied that, copied the tactics, attacked Pearl Harbor in 1941. That brought America into the war. They've got aircraft carriers as well. So we're seeing the battleship made redundant. Fleets can now engage each other beyond visual range, send aircraft over, armed with torpedoes. We're seeing torpedo bombers, for instance, the battleship Bismarck. It has its rudders knocked out by a swordfish torpedo bomber. We can then send in the battleships and destroyers, move in for the kill, and she's sunk. So big modern battleships like Bismarck and Yamato, they're out of the game. The aircraft carrier is now the number one capital ship in the fleet. So, after the Second World War, jet planes come in, and they're faster, they're heavier, they're more difficult to land. A little propeller biplane, they're slow, they're docile. Landing on an aircraft carrier is never safe or easy, but by comparison, the older aircraft are easy to put down on a flight deck. Jet planes, not so much. So during the 1950s, we start to see the innovations. How do we make landing on an aircraft carrier and taking off from an aircraft carrier safer? So we see three main innovations come out of that: the steam catapult, the mirror landing site, and the angled flight deck. Let's have a look at a model and see what we mean. So this is a model of HMS Ark Royal, and it's a pretty standard design aircraft carrier of the 1930s. We've got swordfish biplanes, and these are the Fairy Firefly fighters. And Ark Royal, it took part in the attack on the Bismarck, among other things. It was very successful. Eventually sunk by the Germans, unfortunately. But as you can see, it's basically a straight runway, straight through. It's quite dusty, this model, actually. But again, it's got that island on the starboard side, lifts, or elevators if you want, dotted along the centre of the runway. So if you're a pilot coming into land, and let's just move these planes out of the way, and if you're coming into the land and you make a mess of it, or you miss a wire, you're probably going to end up crashing into someone, or it's very difficult to actually go around for another go. So let's change that. So let's bring in HMS Victorious. Now, Victorious herself was an illustrious class aircraft carrier, typical pre-war design with the straight through flight deck. And after the war, during the 1950s, she was completely rebuilt, emerged in 1958 with this appearance, with the what we would recognise as a modern aircraft carrier, with that distinctive angled flight deck. And the idea of this is your plane can come into land. Here's a Sea Vixen, and if he misses, he can just go round again. There he is, and he's caught the wire. Well done. At the front end, we've got steam catapults. The earlier catapults didn't quite have enough oomph to launch the modern, heavier, bigger jet fighters, so here's a modern steam catapult. The steam catapults used by the Royal Navy at this time basically engaged with a bridle on the aircraft and just towed it along the flight deck. in 1960, the US Navy came up with this nose wheel tow bar design, which is what is still used today by the US Navy and also the French Navy. Coming back again to this thing here, that is the mirror landing site. Now, previously with the older aircraft, you would have a sort of a landing signals officer guiding the plane down with his little ping pong bats. With the faster jet aircraft, they were going far too fast for that, and the idea of this was, if you were on the correct glide slope, all the lights would line up in a certain way, so you knew you would, right, if you went too high or too low, you'd see the lights change and you could adjust your flight path accordingly. So these innovations were picked up by the US Navy. They also modified some of their war-built carriers, and eventually in the 1950s they started work on something bigger and better, and that emerged as the Forrestal class supercarriers. Much bigger than any previous aircraft carriers, 81,000 tons full load displacement, and able to launch and recover the newest, biggest, fastest, most modern jet fighters. Then they stuck a nuclear reactor, or several nuclear reactors in one, to produce USS Enterprise. That became the first nuclear powered supercarrier. That was the prototype for what followed, which became the Nimitz class aircraft carrier, which are still in service today. We're now starting to see the follow-on from that, which is the Gerald R. Ford class. Pretty much a similar layout with more modern systems. You've got an electromagnetic catapult instead of a steam one, so it's another advance in catapult technology. Now, meanwhile, in the Soviet Union, Russia couldn't afford a big supercarrier like the Forrestal class. In the 1970s, they came up with something else. So in the 1970s, Russia produced the Kiev class. Basically, it's a cruiser with a flight deck on it. A through-deck cruiser, you might say. And this was designed to operate the Yak-38 Forger, which was a jump jet. Now, who else do we know who was developing jump jets at the same time? Oh yes, Britain was. Now, we were still basically lumbering on with old 1940s and 50s designed aircraft carriers, the newest of which, Eagle and Ark Royal, had been laid down during the war, and they were getting on a bit in years. There was a proposal in the 1960s to build a new class of aircraft carriers, the CVA-01. Unfortunately, in 1964, due to budget cuts, the whole programme was cancelled, and we never got those carriers. HMS Ark Royal was refitted and came out flying the F-4 Phantom, and remained the only aircraft carrier, the only strike carrier in British service until 1978, when she was decommissioned. And yeah, the government basically said, we're not having aircraft carriers anymore, we can't afford them, maybe, you know, that's it. But around about this time, the Harrier was developed, the brilliant Harrier jump jet. So what the Navy said was, right, let's build a through-deck cruiser. It's not an aircraft carrier. It's just a cruiser with a flight deck that we can fly jump jets off of. This then became the Invincible class aircraft carrier. Oh, sorry, through-deck cruiser. It's not an aircraft carrier. And what we see on this design, it's it's a straight-through flight deck, and it's got that ski jump on the front. So instead of taking off vertically, it allows the Harrier to have a rolling takeoff, which increases the takeoff weight, means it can carry more stuff. The Invincible class, of course, was used, well, the first of the class, HMS Invincible, famously used in the Falklands War, alongside HMS Hermes, which was an older 1940s era aircraft carrier, which had started out as a cat and trap carrier, and then was converted with the addition of the ski ramp to a Harrier carrier. That ship itself got sold to India and became their aircraft carrier for many years. HMS Hermes, the history of that ship, interestingly shared its name with the first purpose-built aircraft carrier, which I mentioned earlier. The history of that ship itself deserves its own video because it's fascinating. Anyway, moving on. This is then adopted by a number of other navies, and curiously enough, Russia adopts it. And then we see the Kuznetsov aircraft carrier, equipped with the Su-33 flanker, has this wonderful combination of a ski jump with the angle flight deck for arrested recovery. Stow bar, as it's known, so short takeoff by arrested recovery. So instead of having a expensive and complicated catapult, you just have a ramp. This design has now been adopted by India and China. India taking an old Kiev class through-deck cruiser and basically getting rid of all the missile launchers on the front and sticking a ski jump there instead. And now they're building from the keel up, from scratch, a new aircraft carrier, but sort of copying the same design. China as well, they're also using the same design. So yeah, we've now got basically three different philosophies to aircraft carrier design. So you've got the traditional angle flight deck, cat and trap or cateau bar design, which is used by the USA and France, who also have a nuclear powered aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle. You have Britain has got new aircraft carriers, of course, now with the Queen Elizabeth class, which is a bigger 70,000 ton supercarrier sized aircraft carrier, but still running on the same principle as the Invincible, which, using jump jets, but now with the F-35. So taking off with the ski jump and landing vertically, rather than using a angle flight deck and arrested gear. And you've got the Russians, Chinese and Indians using the ski jump but with the angle flight deck and arrested gear. So that's it. The history of the history of the aircraft carrier. Thanks for watching. Hope this has been informative. I'm probably going to leave some links and things in the description below if you want to learn more. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.